I got a problem, I got a strange addiction. Somebody help me, I need an intervention. It ain't alcohol or weed, there's just one thing that I need. I got an addiction to fruit trees. Got an addiction to fruit trees. I take a persimmon to breathe. Hey, the next one I'm getting jujube. Got an addiction to fruit trees. Peace, family. Peace, family. I wanted to try to get this video done. This is one that I've wanted to get done for a while. Y'all know I joke around a lot and stuff like that, but this is one of a few where if I don't ever make a video again, I hope that you watch this one. So this is not, it's not clickbait. You know, the title of this video is Let's Talk Livestock. So I want to talk about livestock because that's very important. So y'all are probably saying, yo, what do you know about livestock, VA? You got livestock? I absolutely do. And some of you probably do too. Well, I'm going to say some of you do. You may or may not know that you do. So let's take a look at it. Livestock, by definition, is an animal or animals that you keep domestically that serve a purpose or give you some sort of benefit. You know, ideally the benefit would be mutual, but you know, that's the topic of another discussion. So by definition, you know, when you say livestock, you know, people would think chickens, they would think ducks, cows, pigs, you know, livestock. But I have some livestock as well. And like I said, some of you do too. And my livestock are right here in these bins. So these are my worm bins. And I've had these bins. This one I've had, yeah, take a look at it. They got new food, so they're in there working. This is food I put in last week, so they're working that out. This one I've had for probably about 7 years, 6, 7 years. This one I've had probably for about 4 or 5 years. Now, these are two bins that I keep outside. And why am I saying that? Because we're reaching the fall. We're reaching the fall right now, and some people get concerned about keeping their worms outside. I keep mine outside year round. I have them inside of these bins, and I keep them in a little shed, and they survive the winter. So I don't know what the exact science is behind them surviving, but I know that they survive. Like some forums I've read said that they encapsulate themselves throughout the winter, and then they come back awake in the spring. There may be some truth to that, but I've gone into these bins in the wintertime just to check on them. And if there's food still, you'll find them, moving about. So they do survive the winter. So if you have thought about it, but were concerned because you don't know if they're gonna survive, just rest assured that they will, as long as if there's food in there. So worms by definition are, they're a livestock, and they're a very important livestock as well. If you really research worm castings, and I'm gonna say this, anybody that's growing food, I would recommend that you keep worms. Even if you're growing like on a balcony or in containers, or if you don't feel like you have the space, if you can get a small composter, then you can have a small worm bin. And it's very easy to set up. It's not that complicated. I know that there's some people out there that hate when you try to oversimplify things. I don't like when you try to complicate things. These worm bins I've had, like I said, for years. They have served me very well. They continue to serve me very well, and they're very simple. But if you're growing stuff, I would suggest that you have a worm bin, because there's so much benefit to worm castings. So not to get too scientific, and I want to try to make it brief, worm castings are the most complete, I'm going to call it fertilizer that you could ever use, natural fertilizer that you can ever use. If you look up the NPK numbers, I think it's something like 553. which is a very complete fertilizer. The issue is that, you don't have a lot of people that mass produce it, in a clean way. But this is why I say that if you have enough space for a pot, then you can do worm castings. And I think that that's something that we all should really consider and think about. So as far as my worms are concerned, first of all, there's so much to it, but what do I feed them? Some people feed them their kitchen scraps and stuff like that, and that's all good. But what I found in my experience to be the best food for them is, hold on, I'm gonna show you. Zoom in on that. Yeah, there we go. Camera, I got my camera lady with me. But y'all see this? This is that compost, the pile that I was working on in my last few videos. And I told you that this one is gonna be the one that's going into my worm bin. Now, why do I say that this is the best food for them? Here's the thing. Worms, and by the way, these are red wiggler worms. I think that there's some European night crawlers in here as well. So I have some Acinia foetida, which are the red wigglers, and then I have Acinia hortensis, which are the European night crawlers, and they can live together in cooperation. But the reason why I say that compost, finished or almost finished compost, is the best food for them is because worms do like the food scraps. They like the melon rinds, they even like corn cobs. They do like that stuff, but what they're really looking for is bacteria and fungi. And those are things that you will find in abundance in compost. So you feed them compost, and it's basically everything. You got your organic material. It does have broken down food scraps, but it has those bacteria and that fungi that it's looking for. So just as a fun fact, did you know that worms crush E. coli in their gut? Some people didn't know that. That's what they do. And that's why they're so effective at purifying your soil once you get them inoculated into your gardens. They crush E. coli, they crush bacteria in their gut, and that's what they actually are looking for. They eat the food scraps, but they really love that bacteria. When they get to that bacteria, they push it down through their gizzards. They have gizzards sort of like chicken. That's why they say that you should have greedy material in your worm bins as well. But they push that bacteria down, and then they crush it. And there's a liquid that comes out of the bacteria that they love. So you'll find that in abundance in compost. And I find that they're happiest, they're most active, and it's really a neater process when I give them compost. If you don't have compost, they do well with shredded leaves. You can do your shredded grass, shredded leaf mix, and they do really well with that. But that compost is something that they really enjoy. They also, there's times I'll go in there and I'll give them a banana. A whole banana, not just the peel, but I'll give them a whole banana, and they love that as well. And then they also like cornmeal. So those are things that I give my worms, but their staple as far as their diet is concerned is compost. So just think about it. You have like this rich compost that you're feeding your worms. They process it even more once it cools down, and then it's not black gold, it's black platinum by the time they get done with it. So compost if you're able to, and that's why I was saying if you even have a small kitchen composter, you have a little worm bin, dump that compost into your worm bin and watch them go to work. One of the things that I would suggest, let me rewind real quick. Another benefit of giving them compost as opposed to just food scraps, and I'm not saying don't give them food scraps. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying this is what I've experienced and this is what works for me. Sometimes like when you first put your worms in their bin, you'll find that they'll try to escape, and sometimes they'll try to escape in mass numbers. A lot of times that's because there's either too much acid, it's too acidic, and that could come from certain food scraps. That can come from like there being too much in the way of like green food scraps or nitrogen type food scraps or food scraps that have a lot of water in them. It could be that they're too acidic. And sometimes also you got to think about it. When you put those food scraps in as they are, that stuff composts down and it creates heat. And it could get too hot for them while that stuff is breaking down, so they try to escape. So one of the things that I would suggest, if you have a situation where your worms are trying to get out of your bin when you first put them in, keep a lot of carbon material, like shredded leaves work really well. People use paper towel rolls. I've used that, shredded down, but I think that like the egg crates have worked a lot better for me. So when you get that situation, if it's something where, you're thinking maybe too acidic or there's too much liquid that is built up, just put your carbon material in there. And also always keep on hand pulverized eggshells. That serves a lot of different purposes as well, but it helps to balance out the pH if it's a pH problem. It also provides them grit so that they're easily able to digest the food that you put in there. Another thing is some forums say that eggshells help them to reproduce. I don't know if that's correct or not, but I mean, it can't help. And then you're also providing calcium into what's going to become your soil. So as opposed to you just putting eggshells into your garden beds and waiting for them to break down, because it takes time for that to break down, you throw them into your worm bins. As they're making worm compost, they're processing those eggshells and making it, it's kind of like they're pre-digesting it. And then you put that into your worm bins, and that's, in my opinion, a better material. So always keep pulverized eggshells. Keep a good amount of pulverized eggshells in hand. But as far as like the way that I set mine up to where there's two containers here. And I separate them, like this one here is separated by some PVC pipes. Now they're off on the edge and it's not really separating it, but I'm not concerned about that, and I'm gonna tell you why in a minute. This one here, it's two here as well. They're separated by sticks. There's some bugs down there. They're separated by a few containers. That's crushed down. If you look at the side here, it's really not much space at the bottom, and I'm not concerned about that. The reason why I'm not concerned about that, I know that you separate your containers because you get liquid that comes out of them, which is true. But I think because of the way that I feed them, I don't get a bunch of liquid that drains down at the bottom. It's generally a clean process, and I don't have that issue. So, I keep it separated just in case. But I think because most of the stuff that I feed them is compost, I don't have a bunch of like stuff draining down at the bottom. And even when I do give them other food, like bananas and things like that, there's more compost and carbon material in there, so where if there is liquid, it will generally soak it up. So I don't have the problem of, I'm not gonna say the problem, but I don't have a whole lot of liquid drain out. Now, as far as that liquid is concerned, I want us to understand that the liquid that drains out of these is not the same thing as worm tea. That is what you call leachate, and that can come from just an excess of moisture. Like I said, you put food scraps in, and as they break down, it could cause an excess of moisture that gets drained down at the bottom. You can still use that stuff. That's still good because it goes through, whatever worm compost is in there, as well as whatever other food scraps is in there, and it does have nutrients, but it's not the same as worm tea. So I don't feel disappointed if I don't have a bunch of fluid or liquid that builds up at the bottom. And, I haven't had that issue. So I set my beds up. In the beginning, when I first started, I think camera lady's getting a little tired, so I'm gonna try to...
I'm getting antsy.
She's getting antsy. I'm gonna try to rush through this real quick, but this is important, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But the way that I set mine up initially is I put coconut cord down at the bottom, and then I put food scraps over top of that, let it sit for a little while, and I also, with the food scraps, it wasn't just food scraps, I put, shredded newspaper at that time, egg crates, not crushed egg crates, but broken egg crates I put in there, let it sit for a few days, and then I introduced the worms in. And they did well. They did really well. But I find now I can take shredded leaves, put it at the bottom, just kind of make sure they're damp, and just throw them in there, and they'll tear that stuff up. Like if you look here, these are shredded leaves that I put in there like last week. And they're already in here breaking this stuff down. They're breaking it down. See, they go my buddies, these my workers. They're already breaking this stuff, and it's only been a week. It's only been a week. I'm gonna put some of these into the other bin because when I did this, when I separated the worms from the compost, I actually put most of my worms into this little bin. But they're already breaking this stuff down. They love this stuff because, you know, worms also love fungi. And here's the banana. See there, they tear this up. This is nothing to them. This is a whole banana. They'll tear this up. But worms love fungi as well as bacteria. So when you give them leaves are a material. Carbon is a material that attracts fungi. And so worms love that. So you can just put shredded leaves. Just make sure they're damp and then put your worms in there and they'll go to town. So what I'm gonna do real quick, I just wanna show you this. Now, since this is not all the way finished, I'm just gonna move this to the side because I'm trying to get them ready for winter. And I'm just gonna throw this compost here. I don't wanna put it on top because I don't like to weigh them down. So once they get done here, they can just move into this pile as well. So this is more than enough to get them through the winter. I give them things that, as far as feeding them before the winter time, I give them things that are not gonna freeze. So, you know, I may come in here and give them another banana or two before it gets too cold, but because bananas will freeze, I give them other things. Like I'll give them the compost and I'll give them cornmeal, you know, because they'll still work on cornmeal throughout the wintertime. So that's what I do here. So I just wanted to show you this as I'm doing it. So here you have the material that was in there from before, and this is the new material. And they'll just kind of go back and forth and break this down. So by the time spring comes, this stuff will already be done. And then they can, I'll put a little here, and that's it. That's all I gotta do. Like I said, I'll come in here and put some cornmeal in, and I might give them another banana or two. But this is pretty much it. They're good. They're gonna be good throughout the wintertime, and I'm gonna do the same thing on this end. So why do I feel like worms are important? Like I said, you know, it's really it's like the best fertilizer, the most balanced fertilizer, natural, that you can give them. Also, if you think about it, if you go into a very fertile area where there's a lot of trees, there's a lot of fruit shrubs and things like that growing, there's nobody out there giving them cow manure. There's nobody out there chopping and dropping. There's nobody out there giving them, you know, chicken manure, sheep manure, nothing like that. Nothing wrong with that stuff, but I'm just telling you that that's not what's happening out there. But if you dig up under that fertile soil, you're always gonna find worms, always. So worms it just makes sense. Now, to people who have aspirations and dreams of, you know, being a farmer, having a homestead and having animals and things like that, yo, start with worms. Seriously, start with worms, keep them alive, and then graduate. You know, what's the book say? You know, if you show that you can be a good steward of a little, you know, then he'll make you a steward of much. And I think that good practice as far as like, because I ultimately would love to have chickens. I mean, I don't know if I ever will. I'd love to have chickens or ducks and things like that. But at this point, my livestock, you know what I mean? My livestock that I love are my worms, you know? So it's not complicated. You know, if you're concerned about the complication, yo, there's no smell, especially if you're doing it to where, you know, you're giving them a lot more carbon material, or if you're giving them compost, or, you know, even if you're giving them food scraps, you know, balance that out with a good amount of carbon material. Just your egg crates, you know, when you get done with your eggs, just crush up or rip up your egg crates and just throw them in there, mix it up in there. They love that too. And I'm telling you, if you do it to where there's a decent amount of carbon, as far as like the drainage, like I can take this bucket and make this a worm bin, and it just be this one bucket. You know what I mean? No drainage holes at the bottom. I'd put holes on the sides and on the top lid to give them air, but I wouldn't even worry about putting holes at the bottom because I know that there won't be a significant amount of liquid in there. I wouldn't have to worry about any draining. So if that's something that you're worried about, don't worry about that. You know, just do it in a way. There's ways that you can do it to where you don't have a lot of runoff. What else? Man, I had a whole big sheet of stuff that I wanted to say about worms and worm farming, but I didn't want to read off of paper. So I'm trying to remember if there's anything else that I missed. You know what? Let's do it this way, because camera lady's bugging. We'll stop it here, and we'll do a part 2 if necessary. But listen, I'm telling you, anybody that's growing, do a worm bin. And if you have questions, you know, you can comment, you know, in the comment section. I'm more than happy to help you. I'm more than happy to give you whatever information that I can. But I'm telling you, I think that it would be something that we all should think about doing at least. And, you know, there's nothing but benefit to it. So, all right, family, that's it for now. Me and camera lady, we got other work to do. Peace. All right, real quick. I know I said that was it, but I remember what it was. It's 2 things. One, having to deal with reproduction, and then the other one having to deal with different species living together. So, reproduction. So I've seen people harvest their worm castings, and they're very careful about not getting too many worms in the soil that they're going to be using for like their pots of their garden, because they don't want to lose their worms, essentially, is what I'm gathering. I don't worry about that. You know, yes, if I can grab them, I'll put them back in the worm bin with the new food, but I know that you're not going to, there's no way in God's land that you're going to get all the worms out. And then there's also going to be eggs. There's definitely going to be eggs because they do reproduce. I don't have no issues with that. Like my pots over there that have my trees and stuff like that, they all have worms in them. And the reason is that when I separate the castings and I put the worm castings in with the soil, they reproduce so well. As long as there's food and as long as there's space, even if you have 5 worms in a big worm bin, you give them enough food, and if they have the space, they're going to reproduce. And if they have a good source of food, they will reproduce rather rapidly. So I don't worry about that, because I know that even if I cut my population by more than half, like in that big bin, they'll reproduce on their own. I wanted to say also, I do have a bin inside, a small one, that has a lot of worms in there, and I keep that just in case for some reason something happens and I have to replenish. So I have a 3rd bin, and that one is inside, and it looks a lot neater than the other ones. But they do reproduce well as long as they have food and as long as they have space. Also, with getting them into your pots and in your garden, there's nothing wrong with that, so don't be too worried about that. I can dig into my pots, you know, because I just transplanted some of my figs into the ground, and it was teeming with like red wiggler worms and earthworms. So, you know, that's really a good thing, because it's constantly feeding, especially if you have pots. You know, one of the things is like, yo, what do I feed it? Because it doesn't have access to soil outside. You have worms in there that are constantly breaking down organic material, and they're moving about, they're aerating, and they're, you know, leaving their castings. That's food for your trees and for your plants as well. So don't worry about, you know, getting worms in there when you separate them. As far as separating them as well, I wanted to show, but I didn't get it. The easiest way that I found to separate my worms from the castings is a screen, like the kind you have on your windows. I have a screen where I lay the screen on top, I put the new food on top of the screen. And what they do, they can squeeze through a screen. They go into it, and then they get to the new food. You give it about 2 weeks, and then you can get most of the castings out with minimal amounts of worms. You can do that, and even when you lift the screen up, you'll see them like squeezing through. So that has been the easiest way for me. Like I don't really have to worry about like, you know, sifting and stuff like that, sifting through, and I just throw a screen up there, put the food up there, and then when I'm ready to harvest the castings, they go up when they're done. I give them about 2-3 weeks. They go in when they're done to the new food. I lift it up, dump the other one, and then I put the new food with the worms in it back into the bin. And if I have worms in the castings that I'm using for my garden or for the pots, I don't worry about that, because I know that they'll reproduce. As far as living in cooperation, because I mentioned in my pots, I can find earthworms and red wiggler worms. Like I said, I have two types of compost worms inside of my bins, the Acinia foetidas and the Acinia hortensis, or the red wigglers and the European night crawlers. They will live together without being territorial. They'll just live together, work together. They don't cross-produce or crossbreed with each other, you know, but they can live in harmony. So to me, I feel like that's a lesson for all of us, you know, being able to live in cooperation and in harmony without any conflict. They don't have territory issues. They just, if there's space and if there's food, they all go to work. So, you know, that's the other thing as well. But they are very intelligent. You know, if you observe them, if you watch them, they are very, very intelligent. You know, again, I recommend if anybody that's growing anything in their house or in their gardens, get a worm bin, even if it's a little one. You can get one the size of a shoebox and it'll work. If you got questions, let me know. Peace.